World champion Lewis Hamilton has everything money can buy: luxury homes, private jets, designer clothes, and a garage full of supercars. But despite his incredible success, something important was missing from his life: the close relationship he once had with his father, Anthony. When Lewis decided to track down his very first racing kart, the humble machine his father bought working 3 jobs, no one could have predicted how this search would transform their relationship. The beaten-up old go-kart had traveled across 3 continents over 25 years, changing hands between collectors who had no idea of its true significance. What began as a simple gift became an emotional journey of reconciliation that shocked the racing world. Because in the end, Lewis Hamilton discovered something far more valuable than any championship trophy. The sunset cast a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Lewis Hamilton's Monaco apartment. Lewis sat alone on his white leather sofa, a glass of sparkling water untouched on the coffee table before him. In his hands, he held an old photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. The photo showed a skinny 10-year-old boy with a bright smile standing next to a man whose proud expression told the whole story. Behind them sat a beaten-up go-kart, its once bright paint chipped and faded. Lewis ran his thumb over the image of his father, Anthony Hamilton. Those were simpler days, hard days, but simpler. 25 years, Lewis whispered to himself. 25 years since this photo. His phone buzzed with a message from his race engineer about tomorrow's strategy meeting, but Lewis ignored it. Tonight, his mind was elsewhere. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Mediterranean Sea. The lights of luxury yachts twinkled in the harbor below. At 40 years old, Lewis had achieved more than that skinny kid from Stevenage could have ever dreamed. 7 Formula One World Championships, over 100 race wins, a knighthood, a fortune worth hundreds of millions. Yet something felt unfinished. Lewis glanced at the row of trophies lining his bookshelf. Each one represented countless hours of work, sacrifice, and determination. But none of it would have happened without the man in that photograph, his father. The man who had worked 3 jobs to fund his racing. The man who had sacrificed everything. Lewis picked up his phone and scrolled through his recent calls. His finger hovered over his father's name. When was the last time they'd really talked? Not just the polite conversations at family gatherings or brief calls on birthdays, but really talked like they used to? It had been years since Anthony had been his manager. Years since the painful professional split that had damaged their personal relationship too. They'd patched things up on the surface, but that deep father-son bond had never fully healed. Lewis put the phone down without calling. This wasn't something to discuss over the phone. He walked to his home office and opened his laptop. The screensaver showed him on the podium at last year's British Grand Prix, spraying champagne as the crowd roared. He quickly checked his calendar and booked a private flight to London for next week, after the upcoming race in Barcelona. "Mr. Hamilton?" a voice called from the hallway. It was Rosa, his housekeeper. "Dinner is ready. Shall I serve it on the terrace?" "Thanks, Rosa, but I'm not hungry right now," Lewis replied. "I need to make some calls." After Rosa left, Lewis opened a new browser tab and began searching. He typed "Original Formula Cadet Kart 1990s" into the search bar. Nothing useful came up. This would be harder than he thought. Lewis leaned back in his chair, thinking. Anthony had sold the original kart decades ago when Lewis moved up to more powerful racing categories. Who would keep track of an old, junked kart after all these years? Made a call to his personal assistant. "Mia, I need your help with something personal," Lewis said when she answered. I'm looking for my first racing kart from when I was a kid. It would have been sold around 1998 or 1999 in the UK. Can you discreetly reach out to some collectors and restoration specialists? Money is no object." "Of course, Louis," Mia replied. "Any details that might help identify it?" Louis closed his eyes, picturing the cart. It was a Zip Eagle chassis, number plate KR27. My dad painted it black and yellow. The seat had duct tape on the right side where it tore. "I'll start searching right away," Mia promised. "Thanks. And Mia? Keep this between us. I don't want this getting to the press." After hanging up, Louis turned his attention back to the photograph. For years, he'd given his father expensive gifts, watches, cars, holidays. But none of them had ever seemed to bridge the gap that had grown between them. This had to be different. This wasn't about money. This was about remembering where they'd started, about honoring the journey they'd taken together before fame and success had complicated everything. Louis touched the image of the cart in the photo. This humble machine had been the beginning of everything. Finding it again would be almost impossible. After all these years, but Lewis Hamilton didn't become a champion by backing down from impossible challenges. "I'm going to make this right, Dad," he whispered to the photograph. "I promise." Outside, the Mediterranean night grew darker, and the EDU champion sat alone with his memories, planning a different kind of victory, one that money couldn't buy. Morning light streamed through the windows as Louis packed a small overnight bag. The Barcelona race was behind him, another podium finish to add to his collection. Now he had 3 days before he needed to be back for team obligations. "Flight's ready when you are, sir," his driver Marco said from the doorway. "Thanks. I'll be down in 5 minutes." As the private jet soared over France toward England, Louis closed his eyes. His mind drifted back to Stevenage, to the council estate where it all began. It was 1991, and 6-year-old Lewis Hamilton was sitting on the curb outside their modest home on Peartree Way. He was wearing oversized jeans and a second-hand jacket, watching the other kids ride bikes up and down the street. "Louis, come help me with this," Anthony Hamilton called from their tiny garage. Young Louis ran over to find his father hunched over a small engine, grease covering his hands. Anthony had just finished his shift at the railway, still wearing his uniform pants, though he'd changed his shirt. "Hold this light steady," Anthony instructed, placing a flashlight in Louis's small hands. "I need to fix this carburetor before Saturday." "What's a carburetor?" Louis asked, pronouncing each syllable carefully. Anthony smiled. "It's the part that mixes air and fuel in the engine. Without it working right, your kart won't have any power." Louis nodded seriously, holding the light as steady as his excited hands could manage. The go-kart sitting in their garage wasn't new or fancy. Anthony had bought it used, the paint scratched and faded. But to Louis, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Dad, will I win on Saturday?" Louis asked. Anthony paused his work and looked at his son. "That's not what matters, Louis." "It's a not?" "No. What matters is that you try your hardest, that you never give up. The winning will come later if you put in the work." The next morning, Anthony woke at 5 a.m. for his first job. Louis heard him moving around in the kitchen and got up too, even though he didn't have school. "Why are you up so early, champ?" Anthony asked, surprised to see his son already dressed. "I want to help," Louis said simply. Anthony smiled tiredly. There were dark circles under his eyes. Besides his full-time railway job, he worked as an IT contractor and took on whatever odd jobs he could find, all to fund Louis's racing. That evening, they loaded the cart into their beat-up van. The van had over 200,000 miles on it, and the side door sometimes stuck, but it got them to the races. Will Mum come watch tomorrow? Lewis asked as they drove. A complicated expression crossed Anthony's face. Lewis's parents had separated when he was 2. His mother, Carmen, lived elsewhere with his half-sisters. Not this time, son. But she's cheering for you. At the Hodgdon kart track the next day, Lewis looked around wide-eyed at the other young racers. Their karts were newer. Their suits were cleaner. Their fathers didn't have grease permanently embedded in their fingernails. "Don't you worry about their fancy equipment," Anthony said, noticing Lewis's gaze. "A fast driver can win in any kart." Lewis nodded, but his stomach felt tight with nerves. During the race, Anthony stood at the same corner each lap, giving Lewis a thumbs up every time he passed. Lewis finished 5th that day. Not bad for his first real competition. "You did great," Anthony said afterward, hugging him tightly. "But I didn't win," Lewis said, disappointed. "No, but you raced clean and smart. The winning will come." And it did. By age 8, Lewis was winning local competitions. By 10, he was becoming known throughout British karting circles as a special talent. But the better Lewis got, the more expensive everything became. Entry fees, better equipment, travel to bigger competitions. One night, Lewis found Anthony at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, his head in his hands. "Dad, are you okay?" Anthony quickly straightened up. "I'm fine, son. Just figuring out some numbers." Lewis saw the past due notices before Anthony could hide them. "Is it because of my racing? Is it too expensive?" Anthony's expression grew serious. "Listen to me, Lewis. Don't you ever worry about that. That's my job. Your job is to be the best driver you can be. Understand?" Lewis nodded, but that night, he heard his father on the phone, asking someone for an extension on a payment. The sacrifices continued. Anthony sometimes skipped meals to buy racing parts. He worked through weekends when Lewis didn't have competitions. Their home was small and simple, but the walls were increasingly decorated with Lewis's trophies and medals. At school, things weren't as happy. Lewis was one of the few mixed-race kids, and some children targeted him for it. "Hey, Hamilton!" a boy called out during lunch one day. "Why are you so dirty? Don't you wash?" Lewis felt his face burn with anger and shame. That evening, Anthony found Lewis punching his pillow. "What's wrong, son?" When Lewis explained, Anthony sat beside him on the bed. "Lewis, listen to me. People will always try to put you down. Some because of your color. Some because they're jealous. Some just because they can. You want to fight back?" Lewis nodded fiercely. "Then be so good they can't ignore you. Win so much, they have to respect you. That's how you fight back. Not with your fists, with your success." The next weekend, Lewis won his race by a full 7 seconds. An eternity in karting. As they drove home with another trophy, Anthony reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "That's how you answer them, son. That's how you answer." Lewis nodded, understanding for the first time that racing wasn't just about speed. It was about proving himself in a world that wouldn't always welcome him. Years later, the memory of that moment was still clear in Lewis's mind as his plane began its descent toward London Heathrow. The captain's voice came over the intercom, but Lewis barely heard it. He was still lost in the past, in the days when it was just him and his dad against the world. The plane touched down smoothly on British soil. Lewis checked his phone to find a message from Mia. "Possible lead on the kart. We'll brief you when you arrive." Lewis felt a flutter of hope in his chest. Perhaps this impossible mission wasn't so impossible after all. Lewis's driver waited by the airport exit, holding a sign that wasn't necessary. Everyone recognized Lewis Hamilton. Several travelers stopped to stare or snap quick photos as Lewis walked past in his designer sunglasses and Mercedes team cap. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked as they reached the car. "The Claridge's first to drop my bags. Then I need to meet my assistant at this address." Lewis handed him a slip of paper with an address in North London. As they drove through the busy London streets, Lewis thought about how different his life was now from those early days in Stevenage. Back then, he'd been invisible. Now, he couldn't go anywhere without being recognized. 2 hours later, Lewis stood in a dusty warehouse in Enfield, surrounded by vintage racing memorabilia. Mia, his efficient assistant, was speaking with an older man, whose weathered face suggested years spent outdoors at racetracks. "Mr. Hamilton, this is Oliver Briggs," Mia said. "He was a karting official during the 90s. "Mr. Briggs," Lewis extended his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." "Call me Ollie," the man said, shaking Lewis's hand firmly. "Never thought I'd have a 7-time world champion in my storage unit." "Ollie thinks he might have some leads on tracking down your old kart," Mia explained. "I kept records of most junior competitions from that era," Ollie said, leading them toward a row of filing cabinets. "When you started winning everything in sight, I paid attention. You were something special, even then." Lewis nodded, remembering. "Those were challenging times." "Challenging?" Ollie chuckled. "That's putting it mildly." Lewis's mind traveled back to 1995. He was 10 years old, and the bullying at school had gotten worse. "Look at Hamilton with his racing gloves," taunted Marcus Parker, the biggest boy in Lewis's class. "Think you're special because you drive go-karts?" Lewis tried to walk past, but Marcus stuck out his foot, sending Lewis sprawling. His books scattered across the hallway as other children laughed. "My dad says your dad's crazy," Marcus continued. "Spending all that money on racing when you live in a council house." Lewis felt his face burn with shame and anger. He wanted to hit Marcus, to make him take back those words about his father. But Anthony's advice echoed in his mind. Fight back with success, not fists. That weekend, Lewis won his race by such a margin that the organizers checked his kart twice, suspecting it had been illegally modified. It hadn't been. Lewis was simply driving with all the fury and determination he couldn't express at school. "You were on fire today," Anthony said as they loaded the cart into their van. "They make fun of us," Lewis blurted out. "They say we're poor and that you're crazy for spending money on racing." Anthony's face grew serious. "Look at me, Lewis." Lewis met his father's eyes. "Are they wrong? Are we rich?" Lewis shook his head. "That's right. We're not rich with money. But we're rich in other ways. We have determination. We have each other. And we have a dream." Anthony put his hands on Lewis's shoulders. "Let them laugh now. One day they won't be laughing. They'll be watching you on TV." The memory faded as Ollie pulled out a faded photograph. "This was at the Formula Cadet Championship in '95, he said, showing Lewis a picture of himself as a child, hoisting a trophy nearly as big as he was. "You beat kids whose parents spent 10 times what your dad could afford." Lewis nodded, studying the image. In the background, he could see Anthony, looking exhausted but proud. "There was another event that year," Lewis said quietly. "The one where I met Ron Dennis." Ollie's eyes widened. "The McLaren man? That was '95? "Yes, it was at the Auto Sport Awards. I was named British Cadet Kart Champion, and I went up to Ron and told him, 'I'm going to race for you one day.'" "Bold kid," Ollie chuckled. "He told me to call him in 9 years," Lewis continued. "But 3 years later, he signed me to the McLaren Young Driver program. I was 13. What Lewis didn't say was how that signing had changed everything, and not always for the better. The McLaren contract had been a dream come true. Suddenly, there was funding for proper equipment, proper training. But it also meant more pressure than any teenager should handle. At 14, Lewis sat in his bedroom, tears streaming down his face after a bad race weekend. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," he sobbed as Anthony sat beside him. "What if McLaren drops me? What if I'm not good?" "Enough!" Anthony put his arm around Lewis's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are good enough. Everyone has bad days, even the champions. But McLaren saw what I've always seen, a champion. They're investing in you because they believe in you, just like I do." Lewis wiped his eyes. "I'm scared of letting you down." Anthony's expression softened. "Lewis, you could never let me down. Never. Whatever happens with racing, you're my son first. That's what matters most." But as the years passed, and Lewis moved up through Formula Renault, Formula 3, and GP2, racing began to consume their relationship. Anthony became not just Lewis's father, but his manager, his coach, his mechanic, and his biggest supporter. By 2007, when Lewis reached Formula One with McLaren, their lives had become completely intertwined with racing. Anthony negotiated contracts, handled sponsors, and managed Lewis's career, often sleeping only a few hours a night. Lewis's rookie F1 season was extraordinary. He nearly won the World Championship, coming within a single point. Suddenly, he wasn't just a promising young driver. He was a global star. "Your life is going to change now," Anthony warned him after the final race in Brazil. "Everyone will want a piece of you." Anthony was right. Fame hit like a tidal wave. Lewis's face appeared on magazines, on billboards. Companies offered millions for endorsements. People recognized him everywhere. Through it all, Anthony remained by his side, handling the business while Lewis focused on driving. But something was changing between them. The lines between father and manager were blurring. "This is a terrible contract," Anthony would say, rejecting offers Lewis hadn't even seen. "Maybe I should look at it myself," Lewis would suggest. "You drive, let me handle the business," Anthony would insist. By 2010, tensions had reached a breaking point. Lewis, now 25 and a world champion, felt suffocated. He needed space to grow, to make his own decisions. The conversation happened in Lewis's apartment in Switzerland. "Dad, I think I need a change," Lewis said carefully. "I think I need a professional management team." The hurt in Anthony's eyes was immediate and deep. "You're firing me?" "Not firing. It's just, we need to be father and son again, not business partners." Anthony had nodded stiffly, but the damage was done, though they remained. Cordial in public, their private relationship cooled. The daily calls stopped. The shared victories felt hollow. Back in the present, Lewis blinked away the memory as Ollie showed him more photographs from his early racing days. "I don't have the kart itself," Ollie concluded, "but I remember it was sold to a collector after you moved up to higher categories. A man named Viktor Petrov, Russian fellow, used to work for Jordan Grand Prix." "Viktor Petrov," Lewis repeated, memorizing the name. "Do you know how I can contact him?" "Last I heard, he had a restoration shop in Northampton. Specializes in racing memorabilia." "Northampton," Lewis said thoughtfully. "That's not far from Silverstone." "Exactly," Ollie nodded. "And if anyone would recognize the value of your first kart, it would be Victor." Lewis turned to Mia. "Can you?" "Already on it," she said, typing on her phone. "I'll find his contact information." As they left the warehouse, Lewis felt renewed determination. The kart was out there somewhere. Finding it might be the key to rebuilding what he and his father had lost. "Thank you, Ollie," Lewis said, shaking the man's hand again. "This means more than you know." "I hope you find it," Ollie replied. "Some things are worth more than all the trophies in the world." Lewis nodded. Ollie understood exactly what this search was really about. The drive to Northampton took just over an hour. Lewis sat in the back seat of the black Mercedes, watching the English countryside roll by. Despite his years living in Monaco and traveling the world, there was something about these green fields that still felt like home. His phone buzzed with a message from his race engineer about upcoming strategies for the Monaco Grand Prix, but Lewis set it aside. For these few days, he was focusing on a different kind of race, one against time and fading memories. "We're approaching Northampton, sir," his driver announced. Lewis nodded. The address Mia sent should be on the outskirts, some kind of industrial estate. 20 minutes later, they pulled up outside a large corrugated metal building with a simple sign, Petrov Restorations. The parking lot held several expensive classic cars under protective covers. A tall man with salt and pepper hair emerged from the building as Lewis stepped out of the car. He wore oil-stained overalls and carried a rag in his hands. "Mr. Hamilton," the man said with a slight Eastern European accent. "I wondered when you would find me. I am Viktor Petrov." Lewis shook. "His hand?" "You were expecting me?" Viktor smiled. "When your assistant called asking about an old Hamilton cart, I knew it was only a matter of time before you came yourself. Some things are too personal to delegate, yes?" "Yes," Lewis agreed, surprised by the man's perception. "You understand." "Come, inside," Viktor said, gesturing toward the building. "I have much to show you." The interior was a racing enthusiast's dream. Classic Formula One cars from the 80s and 90s stood alongside historic rally cars and vintage motorcycles. Glass cases displayed helmets, gloves, and race suits worn by champions of the past. "Your collection is amazing," Lewis said, genuinely impressed. "These are mostly restoration projects for clients," Viktor explained. "But some pieces, the special ones, I keep for myself." Lewis's mind drifted back to 2007, his first season in Formula One. He was 22 years old, a rookie paired with double world champion Fernando Alonso at McLaren. No one expected much from the newcomer. First-year drivers were supposed to learn, make mistakes, score a few points if they were lucky. But from the very first race in Australia, Lewis showed he was different. He remembered standing on the podium after finishing third in his debut race. The sensation was overwhelming. Thousands of fans cheering, the champagne spray, the weight of the trophy in his hands. "You've arrived," Anthony had told him afterward, his voice thick with emotion. "This is just the beginning." Race after race, Lewis defied expectations. Podium in Malaysia, another in Bahrain. Then his first pole position in Canada, followed by his first win. By mid-season, he was leading the championship, shocking the racing world. Anthony was there for every moment, managing the growing media demands, the sponsorship offers, the contract discussions with McLaren. Their hotel rooms were always adjoining. They traveled together, ate together, celebrated together. "We're a team," Anthony would say. "Always have been, always will be." But as Lewis's star rose, pressures increased. The relationship with his teammate Alonso deteriorated as they battled for the championship. The media scrutiny intensified. Every word Lewis spoke was analyzed. Every move criticized or praised. After a difficult race in China, where a strategic error cost him points, Lewis sat dejectedly in his hotel room. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," he said, echoing words he'd spoken as a teenager. Everyone's watching, waiting for me to fail. Anthony sat beside him on the bed. You're not going to fail. You've never failed at anything in your life. I'm not just talking about driving, it's everything else. The media, the politics, the pressure. That's why I'm here, Anthony said firmly. To handle all that so you can focus on driving. Lewis nodded, grateful, yet somehow uneasy. He was a grown man, a Formula One driver, yet still relying on his father for everything. When he narrowly lost the championship at the final race in Brazil, Anthony was the one who consoled him, who shielded him from the crushing disappointment, who handled the media so Lewis could process his emotions privately. Next year, Anthony promised, next year will be ours. And he was right. In 2008, in only his second season, Lewis became Formula One world champion in dramatic fashion, securing the title on the last corner of the last lap of the last race. As Lewis crossed the finish line in Brazil, Anthony's voice was the first he heard on the radio. That's how you do it, son. That's how you do it. World champion. World champion. The memory of that moment, perhaps the highest point of their relationship, was still vivid in Lewis's mind as Victor led him through the restoration workshop. You were thinking of something important just now, Victor observed. Lewis smiled. Just remembering my first championship. My father was my manager then. Victor nodded knowingly. I remember. He was very protective of you. They stopped in front of a collection of go-karts from different eras, each carefully restored. The kart you're looking for, Victor said. I did have it once. Lewis's heart leaped. You did? What happened to it? I sold it about 5 years ago. When I acquired it, I did not know its significance. It was just another old zip cart with a faded livery. Do you remember who bought it? Lewis asked, trying to hide his disappointment. Victor stroked his chin thoughtfully. A collector from Germany, I believe. I would need to check my records. Lewis tried not to show his frustration. Another dead end. Another delay. But, Victor continued, before I sold it, I documented everything. I take photographs of all my restorations. The chassis number, the modifications, everything. He led Lewis to a computer and pulled up a folder of images. And there it was, Lewis's first real racing kart. The black and yellow paint was chipped. The seat was torn exactly where Lewis remembered, and the KR27 plate was still visible though faded. That's it, Lewis whispered, feeling a rush of emotion. That's definitely it. Victor noted the look on Lewis's face. This means a great deal to you. It does, Lewis admitted. More than I can explain. It represents a time before complications. Yes? Before fame and contracts and expectations? Lewis looked at Victor with surprise. Exactly. How did you know? The older man smiled sadly. I was a race engineer for many years. I've seen what happens to the relationship between drivers and their fathers. It is a beautiful thing that often becomes entangled. Lewis couldn't argue with that assessment. By 2010, the entanglement had become too much. Success had paradoxically created distance. Lewis had sponsors pulling him in one direction, McLaren in another, and Anthony in yet another. Something had to give. The conversation when Lewis ended. Their professional relationship had been brief but painful. Anthony had nodded, said he understood, but his eyes told a different story. He felt rejected, replaced. The father who had sacrificed everything suddenly found himself on the outside. They tried to maintain their personal relationship, of course. Holiday gatherings, occasional dinners, but it wasn't the same. They had been a team for so long that neither knew how to just be father and son anymore. Will you help me find this cart? Louis asked Victor, returning to the present moment. Victor studied him carefully. It will not be easy. The collector who bought it was private, not one who displays his pieces. Money is no object, Louis assured him. It is not always about money, Mr. Hamilton. Some collectors value their treasures too much to sell at any price. I have to try, Louis insisted. This is important. Victor nodded slowly. I understand. I will help you. As Louis left the workshop, he felt both hopeful and anxious. The cart existed. It had survived all these years. But finding it and acquiring it would be a challenge, even for someone with his resources. Back in the car, he finally returned his race engineer's messages, discussing setup options for Monaco. But his mind kept drifting back to Victor's words about fathers and sons becoming entangled. That was precisely what had happened. Racing had given Louis and Anthony an extraordinary bond, but it had also twisted that bond into something complicated. The simple love between father and son had become tangled with business, with success, with pride both wounded and fulfilled. Could finding this cart really help untangle all of that? Louis wasn't sure, but it felt like the right place to start. Louis's phone rang as his driver navigated through London traffic. The Monaco Grand Prix was just days away, and his team needed him back soon. Hamilton, he answered, keeping his voice professional. Louis, it's Toto. Toto Wolff, his team principal at Mercedes, sounded concerned. Where are you? The engineers have been trying to reach you about the simulator session. I'm handling some personal business in the UK, Louis replied. I'll be back in Monaco tomorrow. Morning! There was a pause on the line. Is everything all right? This isn't like you to disappear mid-season. Louis looked out the window as they passed Buckingham Palace. Everything's fine, Toto. Just something I need to take care of. After ending the call, Louis sighed. Few people understood how exhausting it was to be Lewis Hamilton. The constant pressure to perform, to maintain his image, to be a role model. Sometimes he just needed to step away, to remember why he started racing in the first place. His thoughts turned to Anthony. When was the last time they'd had a real conversation? Not just the polite exchanges at family gatherings or brief calls on birthdays, but a genuine heart-to-heart? It had been years, years of carefully maintained distance. Louis scrolled through his contacts and found his father's number. His finger hovered over the call button, but he hesitated. What would he say? Hi, Dad. I'm trying to find our old cart. It sounded childish, even in his head. He put the phone away without calling. This needed to be done right. Back at Claridge's, Louis found Mia waiting in the lobby with a stack of papers. I've been researching German collectors, she said as they walked to his suite. Based on Victor's description, I think we're looking for a man named Heinrich Müller. He's very private, very wealthy, and has one of the largest vintage karting collections in Europe. Louis nodded, impressed by her efficiency. How do we contact him? That's the problem. He doesn't have a public phone number or email. He does most of his collecting through private auctions. There must be a way, Louis insisted. There is, Mia said, handing him a glossy invitation. The Goodwood Festival of Speed is next month. According to my sources, Müller attends every year to view the historic vehicles. Louis took the invitation, thinking, that's nearly 3 weeks away. Too long. There's another option, Mia continued. Müller's restoration specialist is based in Stuttgart, a man named Klaus Weber. If anyone knows where the cart is now, it would be him. Stuttgart, Louis repeated. I need to go there. Can you arrange it? Now? But the Monaco race? After Monaco, Louis clarified. I can't miss the race. But immediately after, I want to be on a plane to Stuttgart. As Mia left to make arrangements, Lewis sat alone in his suite. On the television, Sky Sports was showing highlights from his previous Monaco victories. The commentators praised his precision, his consistency, his mental strength. If only they knew how fragile he sometimes felt beneath the confident exterior. His mind drifted back to 2010, after he had ended the professional relationship with his father. Lewis had hired professional managers, surrounded himself with a new team. On the surface, it seemed to work. He was winning races, making millions, establishing himself as one of F1's biggest stars. But something was missing. After winning the RIT, Canadian Grand Prix that year, Lewis had looked for his father in the crowd, a habit from years past. Anthony wasn't there. Instead of celebrating with family, Lewis was surrounded by managers, PR people, and team officials, all paid to be there. The victory felt hollow. The distance grew wider when Lewis made the shocking decision to leave McLaren. For Mercedes in 2013, McLaren had been his home since he was 13. The team had shaped him, supported him, believed in him when he was just a kid with a dream. Leaving felt like betrayal to many, including Anthony, who had built such a strong relationship with McLaren over the years. "Are you sure about this?" Anthony had asked, during a rare phone call after the news broke. "I need a change," Lewis had replied. "Mercedes believes in me." "McLaren believed in you when no one else did," Anthony reminded him. "When you were a boy with nothing but talent." The conversation had ended awkwardly, another brick in the wall between them. The irony was that Lewis's move to Mercedes turned out to be one of the greatest decisions in Formula One history. From 2014 onward, Mercedes dominated the sport, and Lewis began accumulating championships with unprecedented ease. One became 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, and finally 7, equaling Michael Schumacher's record that once seemed untouchable. With each success, Lewis's fame grew. He wasn't just a racing driver anymore. He was a global celebrity, a fashion icon, a social activist, a music producer. His life became a whirlwind of racing, photo shoots, business meetings, and public appearances. Anthony watched it all from a distance, no longer in the inner circle. He attended races occasionally, chatted with Lewis briefly in the paddock, posed for family photos at Christmas. But the special bond they had shared, forged through years of struggle and sacrifice, had faded. There were attempts at reconciliation, of course. Dinners that ended with polite handshakes instead of hugs. Conversations that stayed safely on the surface, never diving into the deeper waters of hurt and regret. Last year, after winning his 7th championship, Lewis had invited Anthony to the celebration. It was a grand affair at a luxury hotel in Abu Dhabi, with celebrities, team members, and sponsors all raising glasses to Lewis's achievement. Anthony had arrived late and left early, looking uncomfortable among the glittering crowd. Lewis had wanted to follow him out, to talk to him privately, but he was trapped by his obligations as host, by the dozens of people demanding his attention. By the time Lewis broke free, Anthony was gone. The memory still stung as Lewis stared out the window of his hotel suite at the London skyline. All his success, all his millions, all his championships, what did they mean if he couldn't share them with the person who had made them possible? His phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "Flight to Monaco scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Stuttgart arrangements in progress for after the race." Lewis texted back a simple, "Thanks," then continued gazing out the window. Tomorrow he would return to his racing life, to the pressure and privilege of being Lewis Hamilton. But part of his mind would remain here, in England, where a little boy and his dedicated father had once dreamed an impossible dream together. The distance between that past and his present felt vast. But perhaps, with every step of this journey to find the cart, that distance was beginning to close just a little. As night fell over London, Lewis thought about calling his father again. Again, he hesitated. Not yet, he decided. First, he needed to find the cart. First, he needed to have something to offer besides words. He went to bed with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about adding to his collection of racing memorabilia. This wasn't about nostalgia or sentimentality. This was about finding his way back to the beginning. Back to when racing was pure joy, not a business. Back to when his father was his hero, not his employee. Back to when they were simply a team against the world. Monaco was exactly as Lewis had left it. Beautiful, exclusive, and utterly removed from the reality most people lived in. As his driver took him from the airport to his apartment, Lewis found himself comparing the Principality's pristine streets to the rough Stevenage neighborhood where he'd grown up. The contrast couldn't be more stark. His apartment overlooked the famous harbor, filled with super yachts worth more than small countries. Inside, minimalist furniture in white and gray filled the space. Awards and trophies lined shelves along one wall, physical reminders of his journey from council estate to Formula One royalty. Lewis dropped his bag and checked his watch. He had just enough time to change before heading to the circuit for engineering meetings. At the track, he slipped into his professional persona with practiced ease. He discussed tire strategies, analyzed telemetry data, and walked the circuit with his engineers, pointing out bumps in the asphalt and spots where he could gain milliseconds. No one would have guessed his mind was partially elsewhere, focused on a decades-old go-kart and the father who had once been his everything. "Your focus seems sharp today," Toto Wolff commented after the team meeting. "I'm ready for the weekend," Lewis assured him. "We'll get pole tomorrow." He was right. The next day, Lewis put his Mercedes on pole position with a lap that left his competitors shaking their heads in disbelief. On Sunday, he dominated the race, from start to finish, taking his 5th Monaco Grand Prix victory with a flawless drive. In the cool-down room before the podium ceremony, Lewis sat quietly, while the second and third place drivers discussed the race animatedly. Once, he would have been on the phone immediately, his father the first person he called after removing his helmet. Now, he celebrated with his team, sprayed champagne for the cameras, and gave all the right quotes to the media. But through it all, a sense of hollowness lingered. After fulfilling his media obligations, Lewis slipped away from the celebrations. His private jet was waiting at Nice Airport to take him to Stuttgart. "You're not staying for the team party?" his race engineer asked, surprised. "Got something important to handle," Lewis replied. "I'll see everyone at the factory later this week." On the flight, Lewis reviewed the information Mia had compiled about Klaus Weber, the restoration specialist who might know where the cart was now. Weber had worked with some of the biggest collectors in Europe, including Heinrich Müller, the man they suspected had purchased Lewis's cart from Viktor Petrov. As the plane began its descent toward Stuttgart, Lewis thought about what he would say if he actually found the cart. Would he simply offer to buy it? What if money wasn't enough? What would this mysterious collector want in exchange for something so personally valuable to Lewis? A car was waiting on the tarmac when Lewis's plane landed. The driver, a serious-looking German man, opened the door without a word. "Danke," Lewis said, sliding into the back seat. "We're going to Stuttgart West, correct?" "Ja," the driver confirmed. "To Herr Weber's workshop. He is expecting you." The workshop was located in an industrial area on the outskirts of the city. Unlike Victor's impressive showroom, Weber's establishment was unmarked and unassuming, the kind of place you'd only find if you knew exactly where to look. A thin man with precise movements and wire-rimmed glasses met Louis at the door. "Santhin, Hamilton," he said in accented English. "I am Klaus Weber. Please, come inside." The interior was impeccably organized. Vintage engines sat in various stages of restoration on spotless workbenches. Parts were labeled and arranged with German efficiency. The space smelled of metal, oil, and cleaning solvents. "Your assistant said you are looking for a specific cart," Weber said, leading Louis through the workshop. "A Zip Eagle chassis from the early 1990s. "Yes," Louis confirmed. "My first real racing cart. I believe Heinrich Müller purchased it about 5 years ago." Weber's expression remained neutral. "Herr Müller values his privacy greatly." "I understand," Louis said, "but this is extremely important to me. It's not just about owning a piece of memorabilia. It's personal." Weber studied Louis for a moment. "May I ask why this particular cart matters so much? You have driven many vehicles in your career." Louis took a deep breath. He rarely opened up to strangers, but something told him honesty was necessary here. "My father sacrificed everything for my racing career," he explained. 3 jobs, every penny he had. That cart represents a time when we were closest, before fame, before business, before complications. I want to give it back to him, to show him I haven't forgotten where I came from. Who helped me get here?" Weber nodded slowly. "A gift for your father, then." "More than that," Louis said. "A way back, maybe." Something in Weber's expression softened. "I cannot disclose Herr Müller's private collection details without permission. However," he paused, seeming to make a decision. "I restored a cart matching your description last year. The chassis number was CABE 1993-227. Louis's heart quickened. "That sounds right. Was it black and yellow?" "Originally, yes, though much of the paint had deteriorated. It had been repainted several times over the years." "That's it," Louis said with certainty. "That's my cart. Where is it now? Is it still in Müller's collection?" Weber adjusted his glasses. "Herr Müller sold several pieces last winter, I believe. This may have been among them." Louis felt his hope deflating. "Sold? To whom?" "That I cannot say with certainty. But I know it was purchased by another collector, someone based in Japan, I believe." "Japan?" Louis couldn't hide his disappointment. The cart seemed to be slipping further away with each discovery. Weber must have noticed his expression. "Perhaps," he said carefully. "I could make some inquiries. Discreetly, of course." "I would appreciate that enormously," Louis said. "As I mentioned, money is no object." Weber raised a hand. "This is not about money, Mr. Hamilton. In my profession, we understand the importance of history, of provenance. Each vehicle tells a story. Yours is particularly compelling." Louis nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Here's my private number. Please call me directly if you learn anything." As he left the workshop, Louis felt a mix of emotions. The cart was proving more elusive than he'd anticipated. Yet each person he encountered seemed to understand the importance of his quest, even if they couldn't immediately help. Back in the car, he checked his phone. There were dozens of congratulatory messages about his Monaco win, including one from his father. "Great drive today. Very proud." Simple words. Formal, almost. Nothing like the emotional celebrations they'd once shared. But it was something, a dirty, thin thread still connecting them. Louis typed a reply. "Thanks, Dad. Means a lot." He hesitated before adding, I'd like to see you when I'm back in the UK next week. Just for dinner, nothing formal. The response came quicker than he expected. Sure. Let me know when and where. Lewis put the phone away, feeling a small sense of progress. The dinner would be awkward, probably. They'd stick to safe topics: racing, family news, maybe some sports. But it was a start. As the car took him back to the airport, Lewis gazed out at the Stuttgart streets. This search was becoming more complicated than he'd anticipated. The cart had traveled from England to Russia, from Russia to Germany, and now possibly to Japan. It had crossed continents while he and his father had drifted apart, despite living in the same country. There was a metaphor in there somewhere, Lewis thought. His phone rang, Mia calling with updates. Weber couldn't tell me much, Lewis said, when he answered. I know, Mia replied, but I've been working other angles. There's a major collector in Tokyo named Hiroshi Tanaka, who specializes in European racing memorabilia. He acquired several pieces from a German collection earlier this year. Tanaka, Lewis repeated. Can we contact him? Already working on it. And there's something else. Ron Dennis has been trying to reach you. Lewis raised his eyebrows in surprise. Ron Dennis, the former McLaren boss who had signed him as a teenager, had been a major figure in his early career. They hadn't spoken much since Lewis left McLaren for Mercedes. Did he say what it's about? No, just that it's important and personal. Lewis frowned thoughtfully. Set up a call for tomorrow morning. That night, in his hotel room in Stuttgart, Lewis found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept cycling through the events of the past few days: the Monaco win, the meetings with Victor and Weber, the upcoming dinner with his father, and now Ron Dennis reaching out after all this time. It felt as though pieces were moving, connections forming, as if this search for a battered old cart was triggering a cascade of encounters and conversations that might lead somewhere important. Or maybe he was seeing patterns where none existed. Maybe the cart was just a cart, a piece of metal and plastic that couldn't possibly heal years of complicated emotions. Lewis got up and went to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. One thing was certain: he wasn't giving up. Whether the cart was in Japan or on the moon, he would find it. He owed that much to the little boy from Stevenage and the father who had believed in him when no one else did. The call with Ron Dennis was scheduled for 9 a.m. Lewis woke early, went for a run through Stuttgart's quiet morning streets, then returned to his hotel to prepare. Ron had been more than just a team boss. He had been a mentor, sometimes almost a second father figure. Their relationship had been strained when Lewis left McLaren, but there had always been mutual respect. At precisely 9 a.m., Lewis's phone rang. Lewis, Ron's familiar voice came through clearly. Thank you for taking my call. Of course, Ron, Lewis replied, settling into an armchair by the window. It's been a while. Indeed. Congratulations on your win in Monaco. Masterful driving, as always. Thank you. There was a pause before Ron continued. I understand you've been looking for something. Your first proper racing cart. Lewis sat up straighter. How did you know about that? Word travels in small circles in our world, Ron said. Viktor Petrov is an old acquaintance. He mentioned your visit. I see. Lewis wasn't entirely surprised. The racing community was interconnected, especially among those who had been in the sport for decades. May I ask why this sudden interest in memorabilia? Ron inquired. You've never struck me as particularly nostalgic. Lewis considered how much to share. Ron Dennis wasn't known for sentimentality, but he had always been perceptive about what motivated drivers. It's for my dad, Lewis said simply. A gift. Something meaningful. Another pause. I see, Ron said finally. Your relationship with Anthony has been complicated since the split. That's one way to put it, Lewis acknowledged. Well, I may be able to help, Ron said. Not with the cart directly. I don't know its whereabouts. But I have something that might interest you. Something from that era. What is it? Lewis asked, curious. Better to show you in person. I'm in London this week. Could you stop by my office tomorrow? Lewis checked his schedule. I should be able to make it. Early afternoon? Perfect. 2 p.m. And Lewis? This conversation stays between us. After ending the call, Lewis contacted his pilot to arrange a flight to London. Meanwhile, Mia sent information about Hiroshi Tanaka, the Japanese collector who might have acquired the cart. Tanaka is very private, she explained during their call. He doesn't do interviews or allow photos of his collection, but he's planning to display select pieces at the Suzuka Circuit Museum during the Japanese Grand Prix weekend in October. That's months away, Lewis said, frowning. I know. I'm still trying to establish direct contact. His assistant has acknowledged our inquiry, but says Mr. Tanaka is traveling. Lewis nodded thoughtfully. Keep trying, and arrange for a translator just in case. I want to be prepared if we get a meeting. The following day, Lewis's car pulled up outside an elegant office building in Knightsbridge, London. Ron Dennis had stepped down as McLaren CEO years ago, but maintained offices for his various business interests. Ron greeted Lewis with a firm handshake. Age had whitened his hair, but his posture remained ramrod straight, his manner as precise as ever. You're looking well, Ron said, leading Lewis into a conference room with views across Hyde Park. So are you, Lewis replied. It was true. Ron had always maintained himself meticulously. After they settled with coffee, Ron opened a leather portfolio and removed a folded document. Do you remember when you signed your first McLaren contract? As part of the Young Driver program? Lewis nodded. Of course, I was 13. Probably the happiest day of my life at that point. Your father was very involved in the negotiations, Ron continued. Very protective. He wanted guarantees that we would support your education, your development as a person, not just as a driver. That sounds like Dad, Lewis agreed, smiling slightly at the memory. Anthony had been fierce in ensuring his son wouldn't be exploited. Ron slid the document across the table. This is your original contract. The first one, signed by you, your father, and myself. Lewis unfolded the papers carefully. There it was, his childish signature next to his father's bold handwriting and Ron's precise script. The document that had changed his life forever. I kept it in my personal files, Ron explained. I've only ever done that with a few drivers. Over the years, the ones I believed would be truly special. Lewis ran his fingers over the signatures. Why are you showing me this now? Ron leaned back in his chair. Because I think you're searching for something more than just a cart, Lewis. You're looking for a connection to your beginnings, to what made you who you are. Lewis couldn't deny it. The cart represents something pure, before the business, the fame, the complications. And your father was at the center of that purity, Ron observed. Yes, Lewis admitted. We were a team, partners, Ron nodded. I remember watching you, too, at races, the way you communicated without words sometimes, the absolute trust you had in each other. It was remarkable. Lewis felt a tightness in his throat. We lost that somewhere along the way. Relationships evolve, Lewis. Sometimes painfully, but foundations remain. if they were built strongly enough. Ron gestured to the contract. I'd like you to have this. Perhaps it could be part of what you're trying to do. Thank you, Lewis said, genuinely moved. This means a lot. There's something else, Ron added, reaching into his portfolio again. We documented everything in those days, part of creating a professional environment for young drivers. He handed Lewis a small album. Inside were photographs Lewis had never seen before, professional shots from his early McLaren days, testing sessions, physical training, simulator work. In many of them, Anthony was visible in the background, watching intently as his son worked with engineers or analyzed data. Your father was completely dedicated, Ron said. Sometimes too much so. We had our disagreements, but never about what was best for you. Lewis stopped at a particular photo, himself at 14, sitting in a McLaren engineering office. Anthony's hand on his shoulder as they reviewed data with a technician. I don't remember this being taken, Lewis said softly. You were focused on the work. Always were. That's one reason you succeeded. As Lewis continued through the album, he came across something unexpected. A detailed technical drawing of his first kart, complete with measurements and specifications. What's this? He asked, surprised. Part of our evaluation when you joined the program, Ron explained. We analyzed the kart you were driving to understand your preferences, your driving style. Anthony provided all the details, even brought the kart to the factory for our engineers to examine. Lewis studied the drawing intently. This is incredibly detailed. McLaren thoroughness, Ron said with a hint of pride. Nothing overlooked. Then Lewis noticed something in the corner of the drawing, a serial number and a small note. Chassis KR222793. This chassis number, Lewis said, pointing. Weber mentioned it in Stuttgart. This confirms it's the same kart. Ron nodded. I thought it might be useful. And there's one more thing you should know. After our engineers examined the kart, we returned it to your father. But a few years later, when you moved up to Formula 3, Anthony asked if McLaren would store some of your old racing equipment. We kept several items in our heritage collection. Lewis looked up sharply. Are you saying the kart might have been at McLaren all this time? Ron shook his head. No, unfortunately not. When you left for Mercedes, most of those items were returned to Anthony. I believe he sold many of them, including the kart. That's how it likely ended up with Viktor Petrov eventually. So, we're back where we started, Lewis said, unable to hide his disappointment. Not exactly, Ron corrected him. Now, you have documentation, proof of exactly which kart you're looking for. That will make identification certain when you find it. Lewis had to admit Ron was right. The technical drawing was a crucial piece of evidence. There's one more reason I wanted to see you, Ron said, his tone changing slightly. I've been following your career closely, Lewis. 7 world championships, countless records broken. You've exceeded even my expectations, and they were extremely high. Thank you, Lewis said, genuinely appreciative of the rare compliment from his former boss. You've also changed, Ron continued. Grown into more than just a racing driver. Your advocacy work, your influence on the sport and beyond, it's significant. Lewis nodded, wondering where this was going. I'm involved with a new youth racing initiative, Ron explained, identifying talented children from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing them with equipment, training, opportunities, breaking down the barriers to entry in motorsport. That sounds worthwhile, Lewis said. We need a figurehead. Someone who understands firsthand the challenges these children face. Someone who has broken those barriers themselves. Lewis understood immediately. You want me involved? I do. And I think Anthony would be an extraordinary asset as well. His experience guiding your early career is precisely what many of these young drivers and their families need. The suggestion caught Lewis by surprise. You want us both involved? Together? Why not? Ron asked simply. Your story together is powerful. It could inspire a new generation. Lewis sat back, considering the idea. Working with his father on a project like this, it would force them to reconnect, to rebuild their professional relationship. It was both appealing and intimidating. I need to think about it, Lewis said finally. And I'd need to discuss it with Dad. Of course, there's no rush. Consider it an open invitation. As they parted, Ron handed Lewis a folder containing the contract copy, the photo album, and the technical drawings. Good luck with your search, Lewis. I hope you find what you're looking for, in all senses. Back in his car, Lewis examined the technical drawing again. The detailed specifications and the chassis number would make identification much easier. If Tanaka or anyone else had the cart, Lewis could now prove it definitively. His phone buzzed with a message from Mia. Breakthrough! Tanaka's assistant has agreed to a video call tomorrow morning. Japanese business hours. Progress, Lewis thought. Real progress, at last. That evening, back in his London hotel, Lewis called his father to confirm their dinner plans. I was thinking, Thursday night, Lewis suggested. There's a quiet place in Knightsbridge I like. Private dining room. Thursday works, Anthony replied. His voice was friendly but reserved. How was Monaco? Good. Clean race. An awkward pause followed. I saw Ron Dennis today, Lewis said, breaking the silence. Ron? What did he want? He showed me our original McLaren contract, the one we signed when I was 13. Another pause. I remember that day, Anthony said, his voice softening slightly. You couldn't stop smiling. Neither could you, Dad. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, still formal but with moments of warmth breaking through. They agreed on a time for dinner and ended the call. Lewis sat on the edge of his hotel bed, feeling a mix of emotions. The distance between them remained, but perhaps it was narrowing inch by inch. The cart, the contract, the photos, Ron's proposal. All of these were potential bridges across the gap that had formed over the years. Tomorrow would bring the call with Tanaka's assistant. Another step closer to finding the cart, perhaps. But Lewis was beginning to understand that the search itself might be as important as the finding. Each conversation, each memory uncovered, was helping him reconnect not just with his father, but with himself, with the person he had been before fame and fortune transformed his life. As he prepared for bed, Lewis found himself thinking about Ron's proposal. Working with his father again, helping young drivers from backgrounds like his own, it was an intriguing possibility. Not just a way to reconnect with Anthony, but a way to give meaning to their journey together, to create something lasting from their shared experience. But first, the cart. One step at a time. Lewis set his alarm for the early video call with Tanaka's assistant and tried to sleep, his mind still racing with possibilities. Lewis woke before his alarm, the gray London dawn barely visible through his hotel curtains. He showered, ordered breakfast, and reviewed the technical drawings Ron had given him. By 6 a.m., he was seated at the desk in his suite, dressed casually in a black sweater, waiting for the video call with Tanaka's assistant. At precisely 6:15, the call connected. A young Japanese woman appeared on screen, her expression professionally pleasant. Mr. Hamilton, good morning. I am Mei Nakamura, executive assistant to Mr. Tanaka. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for arranging this call, Ms. Nakamura, Lewis replied. Mr. Tanaka has asked me to discuss your interest in a particular racing kart, she continued. While he is not available to speak directly, he has instructed me to assist you. Lewis showed the technical drawing to the camera. This is the kart I'm looking for. Chassis number KR22793. We believe Mr. Tanaka may have acquired it from a German collector named Heinrich Müller earlier this year. May studied the drawing, then nodded. Yes, this appears to match an item in Mr. Tanaka's collection. He purchased several historical racing pieces in January, including a 1990s cadet kart. Lewis felt a surge of excitement. Is it possible for me to see it? To confirm it's the right one? Mr. Tanaka's collection is private, May explained. However, given your connection to this item, he may consider a viewing. He will be in Monaco next month for a classic car auction. Perhaps a meeting could be arranged then. That would be perfect, Lewis said, trying to contain his enthusiasm. Please tell Mr. Tanaka I would be deeply grateful for the opportunity. I will convey your request, May assured him. There is one more thing. Mr. Tanaka is curious about your interest in this particular kart. He collects items with significant provenance and wishes to understand its importance to you. Lewis hesitated, then decided honesty was best. It was my first real racing kart. My father worked 3 jobs to buy it for me when I was a child. It's where my journey began. May nodded, her expression softening slightly. A personal connection. I understand. Mr. Tanaka will appreciate this context. I will contact you once arrangements for Monaco are confirmed. After the call ended, Lewis immediately messaged Mia with the update. Then he sat back, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The kart was still out of reach, but for the first time, he knew exactly where it was. Progress. Definite progress. His next task was perhaps even more challenging. Dinner with his father that evening. Lewis spent the day in meetings with sponsors and his charitable foundation, but his mind kept returning to the upcoming dinner. What would they talk about? How much should he share about his search for the kart? Would it seem childish to Anthony? By the time his driver dropped him at the restaurant in Knightsbridge, Lewis's stomach was tight with nervous anticipation. He hadn't felt this way before, meeting his father in years. Anthony was already there when Lewis arrived, seated in the private dining room Lewis had requested. He stood to greet his son, and they shared a brief, somewhat awkward hug. You look well, Anthony said as they sat down. So do you, Lewis replied. It was true. His father had aged well, still fit and sharp-eyed at 68. They ordered drinks and studied their menus. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it wasn't natural either, not like the easy conversation they'd once shared. How's the family? Lewis asked. Anthony had remarried years ago and had a teenage daughter with his second wife. Everyone's good. Nicola sends her love. Emma's doing well in school, top of her class in mathematics. That's great, Lewis said, genuinely pleased to hear about his half-sister's success. Maybe she'll be an engineer one day. Anthony smiled. Maybe. She's got options I never had at her age. Options you didn't have either. The waiter came to take their orders, providing a momentary reprieve from the conversation. When he left, Lewis decided to change the subject. I saw Ron Dennis yesterday. Anthony's eyebrows rose. You mentioned that on the phone. What did he want? Lewis explained about the contract, the photos, and the technical drawings. As he spoke, he could see his father's expression changing, the formal mask slipping to reveal genuine interest. Those technical drawings might help, Anthony said when Lewis finished. McLaren was always thorough, even with the junior driver's equipment. It was your idea to bring the cart to the factory for them to analyze, wasn't it? Louis asked. Anthony nodded. I wanted them to see how you'd been driving, what you were used to. It helped them design a proper training program for you. Always. Thinking ahead, Louis said with a small smile. You never missed a detail. Something flickered in Anthony's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of the compliment. Someone had to. Those teams would have pushed you too hard, too fast if I hadn't been watching out for you. I know, Dad. I've always known that. Their meals arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. The tension had eased slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. Ron mentioned something else, Louis said eventually. A youth racing initiative he's starting. Finding talented kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, giving them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. Sounds worthwhile, Anthony commented. He wants us both involved, you and me, working together. Anthony looked up from his plate, surprise evident on his face. Both of us? Together? That's what he suggested. Your experience guiding my early career, he thinks it would be valuable to these kids and their families. Anthony set down his fork. What did you tell him? That I needed to think about it, that I'd discuss it with you. They looked at each other directly for the first time that evening. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition of how significant this suggestion was. It would be complicated, Anthony said carefully. Yes, Louis agreed. It would. We haven't worked together in a long time. 14 years, Louis confirmed. Not since 2010. Anthony took a sip of his water. That was a difficult time. For both of us, Louis acknowledged. Another silence fell, but this one felt different, contemplative, rather than awkward. I'm going to Monaco next month, Louis said, changing the subject slightly. The Japanese collector who has the cart will be there. There's a chance I might get to see it, confirm it's the right one. And if it is, Anthony asked. What then? Louis hesitated. He hadn't planned to reveal his ultimate intention yet, but something in the moment felt right. I want to buy it back. Restore it to exactly how it was when I raced it. And then he took a breath. I want to give it to you. A gift. A thank you for everything you did back then. Anthony's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, to Louis's surprise, he chuckled softly. You want to give me a beaten-up old cart as a gift? You, with all your millions? Louis smiled too, relieved by the break in tension. Not just any beaten-up old cart. Our cart, the one that started everything. Anthony's smile faded, replaced by something more serious, more thoughtful. I remember that cart, black and yellow, number KR27 on the plate. You remember the number? Louis asked, surprised. Of course I do. I painted it myself. Stayed up all night getting it ready for your first proper race. The memory hung between them, Anthony in their tiny garage, carefully painting numbers on the cart while young Louis slept, dreaming of victory. We were quite a team back then, Louis said softly. Yes, Anthony agreed. We were. The rest of dinner passed more easily. They talked about current F1 gossip, about Louis's charity work, about Anthony's golf game. Not deep conversation, perhaps, but comfortable. Normal. By the time they finished dessert, the awkwardness that had marked the beginning of the evening had mostly dissipated. Outside the restaurant, as they waited for their respective cars, Anthony turned to Louis. This initiative Ron mentioned. Send me the details, will you? I'd like to look it over. I will, Louis promised, surprised and pleased. And the cart. Anthony paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I hope you find it. It means something. To me, too, you know. Not just to you. Louis nodded, understanding. I know, Dad. They hugged goodbye, and this time it felt natural, not forced. As Louis watched his father's car pull away, he felt a sense of quiet achievement. Not a breakthrough, perhaps, but a step forward. A crack in the wall that had grown between them over the years. Back in his hotel room, Louis messaged Mia. Dinner. Went well. Any update from Tanaka's assistant about Monaco? Her reply came quickly. Meeting confirmed for June 15th. Tanaka will bring documentation about the cart's provenance. Louis felt a surge of excitement. In less than 3 weeks, he might actually see the cart again. The object that had launched his remarkable journey from council estate to global superstar. He took out the photo album Ron had given him and turned to a particular image. Young Louis sitting in the cart, Anthony kneeling beside him, adjusting something on the chassis. Both focused, determined, united in purpose. That was what he wanted to recapture. Not the working relationship exactly, but that sense of shared purpose, of trust, of father and son against the world. The cart was a means to that end. An important means, but still just a vehicle. Like all the cars he'd driven throughout his career, carrying him toward something more meaningful than mere possession. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Louis returned to racing, securing pole position and victory at the Canadian Grand Prix. He participated in team debriefs, sponsor events, and charity functions with his usual professionalism, but part of his mind remained focused on the upcoming meeting with Tanaka in Monaco. June 14th arrived, and Louis found himself back in his Monaco apartment, reviewing the information he'd gathered about the cart. The technical drawings from McLaren, Victor Petrov's photographs, and additional details Mia had compiled about its journey from England to Japan. His phone rang. It was Anthony. Just calling to wish you luck tomorrow, his father said when Louis answered. With the Tanaka meeting. Thanks, Dad, Louis replied, surprised and pleased by the call. Since their dinner in London, they'd exchanged a few messages but hadn't spoken directly. If it is our old cart, Anthony continued, see if the seat still has that repair I made. Right side, where you tore it on the fence at Buckmore Park. Louis smiled at the memory. I remember that day. You were so angry about the damage. Not angry, Anthony corrected. Worried about the cost. Those seats weren't cheap, and we couldn't afford a new one. So you fixed it with heavy-duty tape and some kind of glue. Epoxy resin, Anthony specified. Worked, didn't it? Never tore again. The conversation continued for a few minutes, both men sharing memories of the cart and those early racing days. When they said goodbye, Louis felt a warmth that had been missing from their interactions for years. The next morning, Louis dressed carefully for the meeting with Tanaka. Nothing flashy, just a simple black shirt and jeans. This wasn't about Lewis Hamilton the celebrity. It was about connecting with his past. Tanaka had suggested meeting at the Automobile Club de Monaco, the prestigious organization that organized the Monaco Grand Prix. Louis had been a member for years, but rarely visited outside of race weekends. When he arrived, he was shown to a private meeting room with views of the harbor. A few minutes later, the door opened to admit a slim Japanese man in an immaculate gray suit. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver-streaked black hair and an elegant bearing. Mr. Hamilton, the man said, bowing slightly. I am Hiroshi Tanaka. It is an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, Mr. Tanaka, Louis replied, bowing in return. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Tanaka gestured to the chairs, and they sat facing each other across a polished table. I understand you are interested in a particular racing cart that may be in my collection, Tanaka began. Yes, Lewis confirmed. A Zip Eagle chassis from 1993, my first racing cart. I believe you acquired it from Heinrich Müller earlier this year. Tanaka nodded. I did purchase several historic racing items from Herr Müller in January. The cart you describe was among them. Lewis felt his heart beat faster. I have documentation, he said, placing the folder containing the McLaren technical drawings on the table. These confirm the chassis number and specifications. Tanaka examined the drawings with interest. Very thorough, he commented. McLaren's work, I presume? Yes. They analyzed the cart when I joined their young driver program. Fascinating, Tanaka murmured. He reached into his own briefcase and removed a slim file. I have conducted my own research since your assistant first contacted me. The provenance of this cart is quite remarkable. He opened the file to reveal photographs of the cart in various stages of its life, first as Lewis's race vehicle, then through subsequent owners. The final image showed it in what appeared to be a pristine storage facility, surrounded by other historic racing vehicles. Is that where it is now? Lewis asked, studying the photograph. My private collection in Kyoto, Tanaka confirmed. Climate-controlled storage to prevent deterioration. Lewis nodded appreciatively. At least the cart had been well cared for. Mr. Tanaka, he said, deciding to be direct, I would like to purchase the cart from you. It has deep personal significance to me and my father. Tanaka's expression remained impassive. I understand your connection to this item, Mr. Hamilton. However, I do not typically sell pieces from my collection. I'm prepared to offer substantially more than its market value, Lewis pressed gently. It is not about money, Tanaka replied. Each piece in my collection tells a story of racing history. Your cart is particularly special. It represents the beginning of one of the greatest careers in motorsport. Lewis felt his hopes sinking. I understand your perspective, Mr. Tanaka, but this isn't about preserving history for me. It's about reconnecting with my father, with our shared journey. Something in Tanaka's expression shifted slightly. Family connections are deeply important in Japanese culture, Mr. Hamilton. Perhaps we can find a solution that honors both our interests. I'm open to any suggestion, Lewis said. Tanaka seemed to consider for a moment. I am building a new wing in my private museum, dedicated to the early careers of champions. Your cart would be a centerpiece of this exhibition. Lewis waited, sensing there was more. If you were willing to contribute other items from your early career, perhaps sign some pieces in my collection, I might consider a temporary loan of the cart to you. A loan? Lewis repeated, trying to hide his disappointment. For a significant period, Tanaka clarified. Perhaps 1 year. During this time, you could restore it if you wish, display it, share it with your father. After that, it would return to my collection, properly credited as having been your first racing cart, with documentation of its significance. It wasn't what Lewis had hoped for, but it was something. A year with the cart, enough time to restore it, to give Anthony the experience of seeing it again, perhaps even enough time to use it as a bridge to rebuild their relationship. I would need to consider your proposal, Lewis said carefully. Could I possibly see the cart first, to confirm it's the correct one? Tanaka nodded. Of course, I anticipated this request. He checked his watch. It should be arriving shortly. Arriving? Lewis asked, surprised. You brought it to Monaco? It seemed the most efficient approach, Tanaka said with a small smile. Given your interest and my presence here for the auction. 30 minutes later, Lewis found himself in a private garage beneath the Automobile Club. A wooden crate had been delivered, and carefully opened by Tanaka's staff. And there, nestled in protective padding, was a small black and yellow go-kart with the faded number KR27 still visible on its plate. Louis approached it slowly, feeling a rush of memories. He knelt beside it, running his hand along the frame, checking details only he would know. The repaired seat Anthony had mentioned was there. Right side, epoxy resin still holding after all these years. The small dent in the left chassis rail, from a collision at Rye House. The slightly modified steering column that Anthony had adjusted to fit Louis's growing frame. "It's definitely the one," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is our cart." Tanaka stood respectfully to the side, watching as Louis examined every inch of the small vehicle that had launched his extraordinary career. "You understand now why I treasure it," Tanaka said quietly. "It is not merely metal and rubber. It is the beginning of a legend." Louis nodded, still kneeling beside the cart. "I understand, and I appreciate your offer of a loan. May I have a few days to consider it?" "Of course. I remain in Monaco until Sunday. Please contact me when you have decided." As Tanaka's staff carefully repackaged the cart, Louis took photos from every angle. He wasn't sure yet what he would do with Tanaka's offer, but he wanted to share these images with Anthony regardless. Later that evening, in his apartment, Louis sent the photos to his father with a simple message. "Found it. It's definitely ours." Anthony's reply came quickly. "The seat repair is still there. When can I see it?" Louis smiled at his father's enthusiasm, so similar to his own. He called rather than texting back. "Tanaka won't sell it," he explained when Anthony answered, "but he's offered to loan it to us for a year. We could restore it, display it, whatever we want. Then it goes back to his collection in Japan." "See, year is better than nothing," Anthony said pragmatically. "What are you thinking?" Louis hesitated. "I'm not sure yet. Part of me wants to hold out for a permanent solution. But seeing it today, it brought back so many memories. For me, too. Just looking at the photos," Anthony admitted. "That little cart took us so far." They talked for nearly an hour, longer than they had spoken in years, about the cart, about those early racing days, about the challenges and triumphs they had shared. When they finally said goodbye, Louis felt a sense of connection that had been missing for too long. The next morning, Louis made his decision. He contacted Tanaka and accepted the loan offer, with one condition. He wanted to be involved in how the cart was presented when it eventually returned to Tanaka's collection. The story of the cart wasn't just about the beginning of Lewis Hamilton's career. It was about a father and son who had defied the odds together. Tanaka agreed readily. "Family legacy is part of racing history," he said. "This will make the exhibit more meaningful." As lawyers worked out the details of the agreement, Louis found himself filled with a new energy. Even though the solution wasn't perfect, it felt like progress, both in his quest to recover the cart and in his relationship with Anthony. That evening, Louis received an unexpected message from Ron Dennis. "Have you considered my proposal about the youth racing initiative? I'm meeting with potential sponsors next week." Louis thought about how naturally he and Anthony had reconnected when discussing the cart. Perhaps working together on Ron's project would continue that momentum. He called his father. "Ron's moving forward with the youth racing program. If we're going to be involved, we should meet with him soon." Anthony was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure about this, Louis? Working together again, I mean?" "I think it's worth trying," Louis replied honestly. "Not as manager and driver this time. As two people who know a lot about helping young drivers succeed against the odds." "Equal partners," Anthony suggested. "Exactly. Equal partners." The conversation ended with a plan to meet Ron together the following week in London. Another step forward, Lewis thought, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. The cart would soon be his for a year. A temporary solution, but perhaps enough time to rebuild something permanent with his father. And wasn't that the real goal all along? The legal agreement with Tanaka was finalized within days. The cart would be delivered to a specialty restoration shop in Surrey that Lewis had selected. His plan was to have it completely restored to its original condition before showing it to Anthony. Meanwhile, the Formula One season continued. Lewis flew to Barcelona for the Spanish Grand Prix, secured pole position, and finished second after a tight battle with his main championship rival. Normally, missing out on victory would have frustrated him for days, but his mind was elsewhere. As A20, soon as the race was over and his team obligations fulfilled, he flew directly to London for the meeting with Ron Dennis and his father. They had arranged to meet at Ron's office in Knightsbridge, the same place where Ron had shown Lewis the McLaren contract and technical drawings. Lewis arrived first, deliberately early. He wanted a few minutes to collect his thoughts before seeing his father and Ron together, a combination that brought back powerful memories. Ron arrived next, precisely on time as always. "Lewis," he greeted, shaking his hand firmly. "Good race yesterday. That defensive driving in the final laps was impressive." "Thanks, Ron. Not quite the result we wanted, but we're leading the championship." They chatted about the current formula. One season until Anthony arrived, looking somewhat nervous in a crisp button-down shirt and sport coat. "Ron," he said, shaking his former associate's hand. "Been a while." "Too long, Anthony," Ron replied with unusual warmth. "You're looking well." Either boo. Three men settled into the conference room. Ron had prepared a detailed presentation about the Youth Racing Initiative, which he called Next Generation Racing, or NGR for short. "The concept is simple," Ron explained, clicking through professionally designed slides. "We identify talented children from disadvantaged backgrounds, economic, racial, gender, any circumstance that typically creates barriers to entering motorsport. We provide equipment, training, mentorship, and a clear pathway to professional racing." Lewis and Anthony listened attentively as Ron outlined the program structure, funding model, and goals. It was thoroughly researched and meticulously planned. Classic. "Ron Dennis, what would our roles be, exactly?" Anthony asked when Ron paused. "Lewis would be the public face, inspiration, motivation, media engagement. You, Anthony, would be more hands-on with the families." Ron looked directly at Anthony. "No one understands better than you what parents go through, the sacrifices required, the pitfalls to avoid." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "The parents need as much support as the kids, maybe more." "Exactly," Ron agreed. "You pioneered a path that many have tried to follow. Your experience is invaluable." As the meeting continued, Lewis watched his father grow more engaged, asking practical questions, suggesting improvements. Anthony had always excelled at the logistical aspects of racing, understanding costs, spotting inefficiencies, finding creative solutions to practical problems. "We could partner with local kart tracks," Anthony suggested at one point. "Secure practice time during off hours at reduced rates. That was always one of our biggest expenses." Ron noted the idea approvingly. "Excellent suggestion. The kind of practical thinking this program needs." By the time the meeting concluded, both Lewis and Anthony had agreed to be involved with NGR. Ron seemed pleased, though he maintained his usual reserved demeanor. "I'll have contracts drawn up," he said as they prepared to leave. "Nothing onerous, just formalizing the arrangement." Outside the building, Lewis and Anthony stood together in the summer sunshine. There was an ease between them that had been missing for years. "That went well," Lewis said. "I think this could be something special." Anthony nodded. "Ron's done his homework, as always. The program has potential." "Dinner?" Lewis suggested. "There's a good Italian place around the corner." "Lead the way," Anthony agreed. Over pasta and sparkling water, both men avoiding alcohol during racing season, they discussed the NGR program further, sharing ideas and observations. The conversation eventually turned to the kart. "It arrived at the restoration shop yesterday," Lewis told his father. "I haven't seen it yet, been busy with the race. But I've hired the best team in the country to restore it." "What's the plan exactly?" Anthony asked. "Complete restoration to original condition," Lewis explained. "Every detail exactly as it was when I raced it. It'll take a few weeks." Anthony twirled pasta on his fork, his expression thoughtful. "I'd like to be involved in the restoration." "Gradirthi," request surprised Lewis. "Really? If that's all right," Anthony added quickly. "It's just, I knew that kart better than anyone. Every modification, every repair." Lewis smiled. "That would be perfect, actually. The restoration team would benefit from your knowledge." "Maybe we could work on it together sometimes," Anthony suggested, "when you're not busy with races." "I'd like that," Lewis said, meaning it completely. The next day, they visited the restoration shop together. The kart sat on a workbench, partially disassembled. The chassis had been stripped, ready for repainting. The engine was being rebuilt by a specialist. Various components were organized neatly on shelves, labeled and catalogued. The shop owner, a former mechanic named Paul, who had worked in various racing series, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Hamilton," both. "Mr. Hamilton's," he corrected himself with a smile. "We're honored to take on this project." Anthony immediately began examining the disassembled parts, asking technical questions about the restoration process. Lewis watched, struck by how quickly his father slipped back into the role of technical expert. "The seat needs to have the repair visible," Anthony was telling Paul. "It's part of the history. Clean it up, but don't replace it." "And the chassis paint needs to be exactly this shade of yellow," Lewis added, showing a reference photo on his phone. "It was custom mixed back then," Paul nodded. "We'll match it precisely. We have ways of analyzing the original paint to recreate the formula." As they continued discussing details of the restoration, Lewis's phone buzzed with a message from Mia about an upcoming sponsorship appearance. The real world intruding on this special moment. "I need to make a call," he told his father and Paul. "Technical stuff about an event next week. I'll be right back." Lewis stepped outside the shop to return Mia's call. Through the window, he could see his father gesturing animatedly, explaining something to Paul about the kart's steering assembly. Anthony looked engaged, energized, like the father Lewis remembered from his childhood. When Lewis returned, Anthony was kneeling beside the kart's chassis, pointing out something to Paul. "This mounting bracket was modified," he was saying. "Lewis was growing so quickly, we had to keep adjusting everything to fit him." "We'll preserve all those modifications," Paul assured him. Lewis rejoined them, and the three men continued discussing the restoration plan. By the end of the visit, it was agreed that Anthony would consult regularly on the project, providing his unique knowledge of the kart's original specifications. "I've got some old photographs that might help," Anthony mentioned as they were leaving. "And I think I still have the original setup sheets somewhere in my attic." "That would be incredibly useful," Paul said enthusiastically. In the car afterward, Lewis noticed his father seemed lighter somehow, more animated than he had been in their recent meetings. "You enjoyed that," Lewis observed. Anthony smiled. "I did. Brought back a lot of memories. Good ones. We made a good team back there," Lewis said. "Just like old times." Anthony's expression grew more serious. "We did. Though nothing's ever quite like old times, is it? No, Louis agreed. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can build something new. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Anthony spoke again. You know, I've been thinking about Ron's project, the NGR program. What about it? The parents of these kids, they'll need guidance, not just about racing, but about protecting their children, about when to push and when to step back. Anthony looked out the window, about knowing when to let go. Louis understood what his father was really saying. That was hard for you, wasn't it? Letting go. Anthony nodded. Hardest thing I've ever done. Your whole life I'd been making decisions, guiding your career. Then suddenly, you didn't need that anymore. I still needed you, Dad, Louis said quietly. Just not as a manager. I know that now, Anthony replied. Took me a while to see it clearly. Another silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like understanding, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. When they reached Anthony's house, Louis pulled into the driveway, but didn't immediately turn off the engine. I found something else, he told his father. Something I thought was lost. What's that? Anthony asked. The original racing suit from those early days. The one with all the patches you sewed on. Mom found it in her attic and sent it to me. Last week, Anthony's eyes widened. The suit still exists? I can't believe it. It's at my apartment in London. I thought maybe we could display it with the cart once it's restored. I'd like that, Anthony said. The suit, the cart, they're part of our story. The phrase struck Louis. Our story. Not his story, but theirs. Shared history, shared accomplishment, shared struggle. I'll see you at the restoration shop next week, Louis asked. I'll be there, Anthony confirmed. I'll bring those set-up sheets and photographs. As Louis drove away, he felt a sense of discovery, not just of physical items like the cart and the racing suit, but of something more valuable. He was rediscovering his relationship with his father, finding new dimensions to it beyond the manager-driver dynamic that had defined them for so long. The cart project was bringing them together in a way Louis hadn't fully anticipated. Working side by side on the restoration, they were building something together again, just as they had in those early days in Stevenage. And the NGR program offered a path forward, a way to transform their personal experience into something beneficial for others. Anthony could share his hard-won wisdom with parents facing the same challenges he had. Louis could inspire children who, like him, had dreams bigger than their circumstances. It wasn't the relationship they'd had before. It was something new, something different. Perhaps something better. Equal partners, as Anthony had suggested, each bringing their own strengths to shared goals. As Louis drove back to London, he found himself smiling. The search for the cart had led to an unexpected discovery, not just of a piece of racing equipment, but of a new beginning with his father. Over the next 6 weeks, between races and team commitments, Louis made time to visit the restoration shop with his father. What started as occasional joint visits evolved into a regular routine. Every Thursday, when Louis was in the UK, they would spend the afternoon at the shop, working alongside Paul and his team. Anthony proved invaluable to the restoration process. He remembered details about the cart that no one else could possibly know. The specific angle of the steering column, the custom padding they'd added to the seat, the particular way they'd mounted the engine to maximize performance on British tracks. We used to shift the engine mount 3 millimeters to the right on clockwise circuits, Anthony explained one day, showing Paul exactly where the adjustment had been made. Gave Louis better weight distribution through right-hand corners. Louis watched his father work, impressed by his recall of these technical details 25 years later. Anthony had always been meticulous, keeping notebooks filled with setup, information, lap times, and observations from each race weekend. "I found these in my garage," Anthony said during one visit, handing Lewis a stack of weathered notebooks. "Every race you did in the kart, every setup change, every result." Lewis flipped through the pages, amazed at the level of detail. "You recorded everything." "Had to," Anthony replied. "We couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. No money for that." As they worked together on the kart, other aspects of their relationship began to heal as well. Their conversations expanded beyond racing to more personal topics: family news, Lewis's charitable foundation, Anthony's golf game. Sometimes they disagreed about restoration details, but these disagreements were respectful, professional, the kind of healthy debate they hadn't been able to have in years. Meanwhile, Ron's NGR program was taking shape. Legal structures were established, initial funding secured, and a pilot program planned for the following year. Lewis and Anthony participated in planning meetings whenever their schedules allowed, often offering complementary perspectives. Lewis focused on the inspirational aspects, while Anthony tackled practical considerations. By late July, the kart restoration was nearing completion. The chassis gleamed with fresh black and yellow paint, meticulously matched to the original colors. The engine had been rebuilt to period specifications. Even the seat had been carefully preserved, with Anthony's epoxy resin repair visible but cleaned up. "One more week," Paul told them during a Thursday visit. "Just final assembly and testing to ensure everything works properly." "It looks amazing," Lewis said, circling the nearly completed kart. "Exactly as I remember it." "Better, I think," Anthony commented. "It was never this clean back then." They all laughed, remembering the constant battle to keep racing equipment presentable on muddy British tracks. "We should do something special when it's finished," Lewis suggested as they left the shop. "Not just take it home, mark the occasion somehow." "What did you have in mind?" Anthony asked. Lewis thought for a moment. "What about Rye House? That's where I did my first proper race in this kart. Maybe we could take it there, get some photos. For memories." "Rye House," Anthony repeated thoughtfully. "Haven't been there. In years. Is it still operating?" "It is. Different owners now, but the track is essentially the same." Anthony nodded. "That would be fitting, where it all started." The following Thursday, they arrived at the restoration shop to find the kart fully assembled and gleaming under the workshop lights. It sat on a special stand, looking exactly as it had in 1993 when Lewis first raced it, only newer, cleaner. "Gentlemen," Paul said proudly, "I believe we've done it. Original specification in every detail, right down to the tire pressure recommended for cadet karts of that era." Lewis and Anthony circled the kart slowly, examining every aspect. Anthony ran his hand along the frame, checking welds and measurements with expert eyes. "Perfect," he declared finally. "Paul, your team has done exceptional work." "Would you like to see it run?" Paul asked. "We've tested the engine, and everything functions perfectly." Lewis looked at his father, a question in his eyes. Anthony nodded. "Absolutely," Lewis told. "Paul, let's hear it." Paul's mechanics carefully moved the kart outside to a small paved area behind the shop. One of them knelt beside it, attached the starter, and, with a few quick movements, brought the engine to life. The distinctive sound of the small racing engine filled the air, a high-pitched buzz that took both Lewis and Anthony back instantaneously to those early racing days. The mechanic adjusted the idle, and the engine settled into a smooth, consistent rhythm. "Sounds perfect," Anthony said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "It does," Lewis agreed, feeling a lump in his throat. After running the engine for a few minutes to ensure everything was functioning correctly, Paul's team shut it down and prepared the cart for transport. "So, Rye House on Saturday?" Lewis confirmed as they left the shop. "I'll be there," Anthony promised. Saturday dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for their visit to Rye House Kart Circuit. Lewis had arranged for the track to be closed to the public for 2 hours in the morning, ensuring privacy for this personal moment. When Lewis arrived, transport truck behind him carrying the restored cart, he found his father already there, talking with the track manager. Anthony had brought something with him, Lewis's original racing suit, freshly cleaned, but still bearing the faded patches from his early sponsors. "Thought this should be here too," Anthony explained, holding up the small racing suit. "Complete, the picture." They unloaded the cart near the starting grid, the same place where Lewis had lined up for his first proper race. A photographer Lewis had hired captured the moment as father and son positioned the cart on the track, making sure everything looked perfect. "Want to sit in it?" Anthony asked. "For old time's sake," Lewis laughed. "I don't think I'd fit anymore." "Probably not," Anthony agreed, smiling. "You were tiny back then, all helmet and racing suit." They posed for photos with the cart, first formal shots for the documentation that would eventually go to Tanaka's collection, then more casual ones just for themselves. The photographer, sensing the personal nature of the moment, stepped back, allowing Lewis and Anthony space to experience this reconnection privately. As they stood together beside the cart, Lewis felt a sense of completion. The search that had begun in his Monaco apartment months ago had led here to this moment of quiet triumph. The cart itself was important, yes, but what it had helped rebuild between him and his father was the real victory. "I've been thinking," Lewis said as they walked the track together. The cart temporarily left at the starting line. "About what happens when the year is up and the cart goes back to Tanaka." Anthony nodded. "We always knew it was alone." "What if we could keep it permanently?" Lewis suggested. "Not the original, but an exact replica. Paul says they could build one identical to this in every detail." "A replica," Anthony repeated thoughtfully. "That could work." "But there's something else I've been considering," Lewis continued. "Something bigger." They had reached a corner of the track, the same corner where Anthony used to stand during Lewis's races, giving him a thumbs up each lap. "I'm listening," Anthony said. Lewis took a deep breath. "What if we bought Rye House?" Anthony's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "The whole circuit?" "Yes. The current owners are considering selling. Mia looked into it for me." "And do what with it?" Anthony asked, though his expression suggested he might already understand Lewis's thinking. "Turn it into the headquarters for NGR," Lewis explained. "A dedicated facility where kids can learn to race, where parents can get support. We could build proper training facilities, classrooms, everything needed to develop young drivers the right way." Anthony was quiet for a moment, taking in the idea. "That's ambitious," he said finally. "Too ambitious?" Lewis asked. Anthony shook his head. "No, it's perfect, actually. This place, it's where so many drivers started, including you. It has history. We could run it together," Lewis suggested. "You managing the facility, me handling the public-facing aspects. Equal partners." The phrase resonated between them, a confirmation of their new relationship dynamic. "It would be a major commitment," Anthony noted. "For both of us." "I know," Lewis acknowledged. "I've been thinking about the future a lot lately. What comes after racing?" Anthony looked at him sharply. "You're not thinking of retiring?" Lewis smiled. "Not immediately. But I won't race forever. And when I do stop, I want to have something meaningful to move into." something that makes a difference. They continued walking the track in silence for a few moments, each considering the implications of this potential new chapter. It would mean spending a lot more time together, Anthony observed finally, working closely again. Different than before, Lewis clarified. No manager-driver dynamic, just two people with complementary skills working toward a common goal. Anthony nodded slowly. I'd need to think about it. Discuss it with Linda. Linda was Anthony's wife, Lewis's stepmother. Of course, Lewis agreed. It's just an idea at this stage. But I wanted you to be the first to know. They completed their lap of the track and returned to the cart, still sitting where they had left it on the starting grid. It looked somehow both out of place and perfectly at home, a piece of the past existing in the present, bridging two eras. The photographer had packed up his equipment, respecting their privacy. The track manager had disappeared into the office. It was just Lewis and Anthony now, father and son, standing beside the small vehicle that had launched an extraordinary journey. Whether or not we do the Rye House project, Lewis said, I'm glad we found the cart. Glad we did this together. Me too, Anthony replied simply. As they prepared to load the cart back into the transport truck, Lewis felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The search had led him not just to the cart, but to a renewed relationship with his father, different than before, but perhaps stronger, more balanced. And now they stood at the threshold of something new, a potential shared future that would honor their past while creating opportunities for others to follow a similar path. It was, Lewis thought, the most valuable discovery of all. 3 months later, Lewis stood on the balcony of his Monaco apartment, gazing out at the Mediterranean. The Formula One season was over. Another championship added to his collection, his 8th, breaking Michael Schumacher's record at last. But for once, racing achievements weren't foremost in his mind. His phone buzzed with a message from Anthony. Just got off the call with the solicitors. Paperwork should be ready next week. Lewis smiled. After careful consideration and numerous discussions, they had decided to proceed with the Rye House project. The purchase of the circuit was nearly complete, and plans for transforming it into the NGR headquarters were well underway. Another message followed. Ron says the first group of kids has been selected for the pilot program. 20 of them, starting in January. 20 children, Lewis thought, each with their own dreams, their own potential. Kids from backgrounds much like his own, talent and determination in abundance, resources in short supply. But now they would have what he'd had, someone who believed in them, who would fight for their chance. The cart sat in a special display case in his London home, a reminder of where he'd come from. It would return to Tanaka in Japan eventually, but Lewis was increasingly at peace with that. The cart had served its purpose, not just as a vehicle for racing, but as a vehicle for reconciliation, and the replica Paul was building would remain, with them permanently, to be displayed at the new Rye House facility as inspiration for the NGR participants. Lewis's phone rang, Mia calling with updates about his schedule. The press conference about NGR and Rye House is confirmed for next Tuesday, she told him. All major motorsport media will attend. Your father is set to join you on stage, and Ron will speak as well. Perfect, Lewis replied. And the other thing we discussed? All arranged, Mia confirmed. It will be delivered to Rye House on Monday morning, installed and ready for the announcement. Thank you, Lewis said. Make sure no one leaks that detail. I want it to be a surprise. After ending the call, Lewis checked his watch. He needed to pack for his flight to London the next day. The press conference would mark the official announcement of both his involvement with NGR and the acquisition of Rye House. It would also be the first time he and his father appeared professionally together since their split in 2010. But this time, their relationship was different. Balanced, respectful, collaborative. Equal partners, as they'd agreed, each bringing their own strengths to a shared vision. The following Tuesday, Lewis arrived at Rye House early. The circuit had been prepared for the press conference, with a stage set up near the starting grid. Banners bearing the NGR logo, designed by Lewis himself, hung from the fences. Camera crews were setting up equipment, journalists chatting in small groups. Lewis made his way to the circuit office, now temporarily serving as a green room. Anthony was already there, reviewing his notes for the announcement. He looked up when Lewis entered. "Ready for this?" Lewis asked. Anthony nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." He straightened his tie nervously. "Been a while since I've faced the press like this." "You'll be great," Lewis assured him. "Just speak from the heart about why this matters to you." Ron arrived shortly after, impeccably dressed as always. The three men spent a few minutes reviewing the announcement agenda, making sure everyone was clear on their roles. "The first question will likely be about your future in Formula One, Lewis," Ron noted. Given the timing of this announcement, Lewis nodded. He had anticipated this. "I'll handle it. Make it clear this is an addition to my racing career, not a replacement, at least for now." At precisely 10 a.m., they walked out to the stage. Camera flashes erupted as the assembled media captured the unusual sight of Lewis Hamilton, Anthony Hamilton, and Ron Dennis appearing together. Lewis took his position at the podium, with Anthony and Ron seated behind him. "Good morning," Lewis began. "Thank you all for coming today. I'm here to announce a project that's deeply personal to me, one that connects my past with what I hope will be an important part of my future." He outlined the Next Generation Racing program, explaining its mission to discover and develop young driving talent from underrepresented backgrounds. He spoke about the acquisition of Rye House, its significance as the place where his own journey began, and how it would be transformed into a state-of-the-art training facility for the next generation. "This circuit," he said, gesturing around him, "is where I had my first real race, where I learned the fundamentals of what would become my career. It seems fitting that it now becomes a place where other children can begin their journeys." Lewis then introduced Anthony, inviting him to the podium. The photographers' cameras clicked rapidly, documenting this public reunion. "My father," Lewis said, placing a hand briefly on Anthony's shoulder, "was the original architect of my racing career. His guidance, his sacrifice, his unwavering belief in my ability, these were the foundations of everything I've achieved. Now, we're working together again to create opportunities for children who, like me, need someone to believe in them." Anthony spoke next, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. He talked about the challenges facing parents of young racers, financial, logistical, emotional, and how NGR would provide support in all these areas. "Racing changed our lives," Anthony concluded. "Not just Lewis's life, but our entire family's. With NGR, we hope to make that positive change possible for many more families." Ron followed with details about the program's structure, funding, and long-term goals. His presentation was characteristically precise, laying out a clear vision for how NGR would operate. When the formal announcements concluded, Lewis retook the podium. "Before we take questions, there's one more thing I'd like to show you." He gestured toward the circuit entrance, where a vehicle sat beneath a large cover. At Lewis's signal, staff members removed the cover to reveal the replica of his childhood kart. Mounted on an elegant display stand, beside it stood a tall object, covered by a smaller sheet. This is an exact replica of the cart where it all began, Lewis explained. The original will return to a private collection in Japan, but this replica will remain here permanently, a reminder of humble beginnings and ambitious dreams. Lewis walked to the covered object beside the cart and paused, looking at his father. "Dad, would you join me for this?" Anthony looked surprised, but stood and joined Lewis by the covered object. "When we began restoring the original cart," Lewis continued, addressing the media but looking at his father, "it became about more than just recovering a piece of racing history. It became about reconnecting with where we started, remembering the journey we took together." He turned to Anthony. "Dad, you've never received proper recognition for everything you did to make my career possible. The sacrifices you made, the barriers you broke down, the path you created that others now follow. Today, that changes." Lewis removed the cover to reveal a bronze plaque mounted on a stone base. The plaque read, "Anthony Hamilton Training Center, dedicated to the father who made a champion possible. Established 2025." Anthony stared at the plaque, visibly moved. The training building where NGR participants would learn racecraft, physical training, and racing theory would bear his name, a permanent acknowledgement of his contribution to Lewis's success and, by extension, to motorsport history. "Dad," Lewis said, no longer addressing the media, but speaking directly to his father, "this place is as much your legacy as it is mine. You deserve to be recognized for what you achieved, for what we achieved together." Anthony, rarely at a loss for words, seemed unable to speak. Instead, he embraced his son in front of the assembled media, a spontaneous, genuine moment that the photographers captured eagerly. When they separated, both men had tears in their eyes. The press conference continued with questions from journalists, but that embrace had already become the story of the day. Father and son reunited, their relationship healed, their shared legacy secured. Later, after the media had departed, Lewis and Anthony walked the Rye House circuit together, discussing plans for renovations and improvements. "The Anthony Hamilton Training Center," Anthony said, shaking his head with a smile. "You didn't tell me about that part." "Wanted it to be a surprise," Lewis replied. "Like I said, it's your legacy too." "Our legacy," Anthony corrected him. "We did it together. Then and now." They stopped at the corner where Anthony used to stand during Lewis's childhood races, offering encouragement as his son sped past. "I'm proud of you, Lewis," Anthony said quietly. "Not just for the championships or the records, for the man you've become, for doing something meaningful with your success." Lewis felt a warmth spread through his chest at words he'd longed to hear for years. "Couldn't have done any of it without you, Dad. Then or now." As they completed their circuit of the track, plans for the future filling their conversation, Lewis thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the council estate in Stevenage to the pinnacle of global motorsport. From the tiny cart with its hand-painted number plate to the multi-million-pound racing machines he now drove. From the days when they were a team of two against the world to the major operation they were now creating together. The cart had been the beginning. Pointe vehicle that launched an extraordinary journey. Finding it again had launched another journey, one of reconciliation and renewal. And now, as they stood at Rye House, planning a future that would honor their past while creating opportunities for others, Lewis understood the true value of what they had rediscovered. Not just a cart, not just memories, but the bond between father and son, transformed by time and experience, tested by success and separation, but ultimately unbreakable. That was the revelation that had shocked everyone who knew their story. that despite fame and fortune, despite professional separation and personal distance, Lewis Hamilton's greatest achievement might not be his racing records at all, but finding his way back to where it all began. Back to his father. Back to their shared dream. Back to the team they had always been at heart. The journey from estrangement to reconciliation reminds us all about what truly matters in life, the relationships we build and maintain, especially with family. Where are you listening from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'd love to know which part of the world you're enjoying this story from. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more inspiring stories about sports legends, family relationships, and the human moments behind the celebrity spotlight. Don't forget to share this video with friends and family who might need a reminder about the importance of reconciliation and forgiveness. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness through these powerful stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.